The study smelled of leather and old cigars, its walls lined with portraits of Miller's past. Stern men, jeweled women, a dynasty carved in oil and gilt. Edward Miller sat at the head of the oak table, his cane resting across his lap like a weapon. A single candle flickered between him and his grandchildren. He opened a heavy leather-bound ledger with a thud that echoed through the silence. "This family," he began, his voice gravel and ice, "does not marry peasants. Swear it, or lose everything." Daniel leaned back in his chair, smirking, as if he already knew how this would play out. He enjoyed these confrontations, watching his sister squirm under the patriarch's gaze. Sophia sat stiffly, her hands clenched in her lap, eyes darting between Edward and the book in front of her. Edward pushed the ledger toward her. "Read it aloud, the words your bloodline has obeyed for 2 centuries." Sophia's throat tightened. She stared at the brittle page, at the oath written in ink that had outlived empires. The words seemed to burn. "No heir shall betray the bloodline by wedding beneath their station. Any who do shall be disowned, their names struck from the house of Miller forever." Her lips parted, but no sound came. "Go on," Edward pressed. "A vow is nothing unless spoken." Daniel tilted his head, feigning encouragement. "It's just words, Sophia. What's the hesitation?" Her pulse thudded in her ears. The candlelight blurred as she forced the words out, each syllable heavy with dread. Daniel repeated them smoothly, almost gleefully, his voice ringing with exaggerated loyalty. Edward's eyes narrowed. He caught the slight tremor in Sophia's tone, the half-second pause before she finished. He leaned forward, his shadow stretching long across the table. "A vow must come from conviction, not fear. If your heart wavers, so does the empire." Sophia finally raised her eyes to his, trying to mask the storm inside her. "I swore it. Isn't that enough?" Edward's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He closed the ledger with a slam, dust rising into the air like smoke from a gunshot. Daniel chuckled softly, the sound almost cruel in its satisfaction. The siblings rose. Sophia moved toward the door, her back straight but her hands trembling at her sides. As she reached the threshold, Edward's voice cut through the silence. "Daniel." Her brother stopped. Sophia turned, but Edward's gaze was fixed only on him. "Watch your sister," Edward murmured, his tone low and poisonous. "She's hiding something." The old man's eyes glinted in the candlelight, sharp as knives. Daniel's smirk widened as he glanced at Sophia, who froze under his stare. In that moment she knew, whatever secret she held close to her heart, she would not be the only one guarding it anymore. She slipped into the hallway, her breath catching, the sound of the ledger's slam still echoing in her chest. Behind her, the 2 men shared a silence heavy with suspicion and promise. And somewhere in the shadows of the mansion, the walls seemed to whisper, "The oath has been revived, and someone will pay for breaking it." The night air was heavy with the perfume of roses climbing up the mansion walls. Sophia stood on the balcony outside her room, phone clutched tight in her hand, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll find a way. I swear it. Forever means forever." Her words drifted into the dark. Carried by the restless wind, a shadow stirred behind her, the faint creak of a floorboard. Daniel stood in the doorway, unseen, his sharp eyes catching the glow of her screen, his ears hungry for fragments of her whispered devotion. He lingered just long enough to hear the name she breathed. Soft, desperate, forbidden, before stepping back into the shadows with the faintest curl of a smile. Sophia pressed her phone to her chest, closing her eyes. She could feel the walls of the house pressing in, the weight of Edward's vow still choking her throat. A tear slipped down her cheek as she whispered, "They'll never understand." Later that night, Elena found her in the library, sitting curled in an armchair with a book unopened on her lap. The maid paused in the doorway, hesitant, but Sophia's trembling gave her away. "Elena," Sophia said suddenly, her voice breaking. "I can't let him go, not for grandfather, not for anyone." Elena's face softened with something unspoken, but her words came out clipped, careful. "In this house, love is dangerous. Secrets even more so." Sophia's breath hitched. "But he's all I have. When I'm with him, I feel free. Not a Miller, not an heir. Just me." Elena crossed the room, lowering her voice until it was barely a whisper. "Freedom here always has a price. Remember that." Her eyes darted toward the doorway as if the house itself were listening. Daniel reappeared just after dawn, knocking lightly on Sophia's door as if nothing had happened. He leaned against the frame, casual, a smirk tugging at his lips. "You were restless last night," he said smoothly. "Couldn't sleep." Sophia stiffened. "I don't need you spying on me." "I wasn't spying," he lied, watching her eyes dart, her shoulders tense. "I just worry. Grandfather wouldn't be pleased if you were distracted. You know how he gets." Sophia's silence was answer enough. Daniel let the moment stretch, savoring the way her fear betrayed her. He tilted his head, voice low. "Careful, little sister. Secrets don't last long in this house." He left her standing there, pale and shaken, the warning hanging in the air like smoke from a fire she couldn't put out. Down the hall, Daniel pulled his phone from his pocket. His fingers tapped quickly, his grin widening with every word typed. An anonymous message formed, sharp as a blade. "Your granddaughter is breaking the oath." He hit send. Somewhere deep in the mansion, Edward's study lamp flickered to life, the old man's shadow falling across the walls as he read the message in silence. His cane tapped once against the floor, a sound like a judge's gavel. And upstairs, Sophia leaned against her door, heart racing, knowing that whatever storm she feared was no longer distant. It was already on its way. The morning light was cruel in Edward's study, spilling across the oak desk where an unmarked envelope lay waiting. His hands, veined and steady, slid it open. Inside, a single photograph. Sophia, radiant and laughing, seated in a cheap diner with a boy who had no right to be by her side. His shirt was plain, his hands calloused, but the way she looked at him cut deeper than any betrayal Edward had ever known. His jaw clenched. "So this is the weakness," he muttered, "the rot in my bloodline." At breakfast, the family gathered in the sunlit dining room, silver gleaming, servants moving like shadows. Edward sat at the head, his cane across his lap. He watched Sophia with the stillness of a predator. "Tell me, Sophia," he said suddenly, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Would you disgrace your bloodline for love?" The fork slipped from her hand, clattering against her plate. Catherine's eyes flicked up in alarm, but Edward's gaze never shifted. Sophia forced a breath, tried to steady her voice. "I don't know what you mean." Daniel, seated beside her, allowed himself the faintest smirk. He sipped his coffee slowly, enjoying the tension thickening around the table. Edward leaned forward, eyes piercing. "A Miller doesn't hesitate when asked about loyalty. So I'll ask again. Would you shame this family for something as fleeting as affection?" Sophia's chest tightened. She could feel the blood rush to her cheeks, her mind screaming at her to lie, to deny, but her lips betrayed her with silence. Edward slammed his palm on the table, the plates rattling. "Answer me!" The room went still. Catherine tried to interject, her voice trembling. "Edward, please, she's just a girl." "Quiet," he snapped, his eyes never leaving Sophia. Sophia swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "I would never betray this family." Daniel chuckled softly, covering it with a cough. He leaned toward her just enough for her to hear, murmuring, "Convincing." Edward's eyes narrowed, suspicion sharpening like a blade. He could hear the falter in her tone, the hidden plea behind her denial. Sophia dropped her gaze to her plate, but her mind drifted back to the first time she met him, her forbidden love. She'd been at the university library seeking silence, and instead found laughter. He was no heir, no businessman, just a boy who smiled at her as though she weren't a Tia Miller, but simply a girl worth knowing. His warmth was nothing like the cold marble halls she called home. The memory lingered, dangerous and sweet, even as her grandfather's fury pressed down on her like a weight. Edward rose slowly, gripping his cane, his voice deep and final. "If this boy exists, I will destroy him." Sophia's breath caught, the blood draining from her face. She forced herself not to react, not to give anything away, but her trembling hands betrayed her. Across the table, Daniel watched with triumph shining in his eyes. His trap was closing, and she was caught. Edward's cane struck the marble floor, echoing like a death knell. The old man's words hung in the air, heavy, inescapable. And Sophia knew in that instant, the war for her heart had become a war for survival. He night pressed heavy against the glass walls of the Miller estate, a storm building somewhere far beyond the hills. Inside, Sophia sat in her room, her fingers tracing the edge of a folded note she had hidden beneath her pillow. It was his handwriting, clumsy but warm, promising to wait for her no matter the cost. She pressed it to her chest, the only defiance she could allow herself. A sudden knock shattered the fragile quiet. Before she could answer, the door creaked open, and Daniel stepped inside, carrying a glass of whiskey and a smile far too sharp to be brotherly. "You're trembling, sister," he said softly, shutting the door behind him. "What did grandfather say that has you so pale?" Sophia stiffened, trying to mask her fear. "He said nothing. He just wants me to focus on the family." Daniel circled the room, his gaze lingering on her desk, her shelves, her bed. His movements were lazy but deliberate, like a cat stalking prey. "Grandfather doesn't rage over nothing." He stopped at her vanity, running a finger across the polished surface. "You're hiding something. I can feel it." Her heart pounded. She forced a calmness she didn't feel. "You always imagine ghosts in every shadow, Daniel." He chuckled, sipping his drink. "Not ghosts. Opportunities." He leaned closer, his voice a whisper now. "If you're lying, I'll find out. And when I do, I won't protect you." The glass in his hand tilted, spilling amber drops onto her rug, but he didn't notice, or didn't care. His eyes locked on hers, searching, daring her to slip. Sophia looked away, clutching the hidden note under her pillow tighter, praying he wouldn't see. The silence thickened, broken only by the faint rumble of thunder outside. Then Daniel's smile returned, cold and victorious. "You're not as clever as you think, Sophia. Be careful where you leave your secrets." He turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing down the marble corridor. Sophia exhaled shakily, clutching the note in her hands now. Panic surged. He was circling closer, and if he found out, her love would be destroyed before it even had a chance to breathe. She knew she couldn't keep the secret buried within these walls much longer. She needed to see him, to warn him of Edward's wrath, to tell him that danger was no longer a distant threat, but a blade already at their throats. Lightning flashed across the window, casting her reflection in the glass, her face pale, her eyes burning with defiance. For the first time, she wasn't only afraid, she was furious. Sophia rose, grabbed her coat, and slipped out into the corridor. Elena, the maid, appeared suddenly in the shadows, as if she had been waiting. Her expression was unreadable, her voice hushed. "Miss Sophia," Elena murmured, stepping closer, "if you value him, keep him away from this house. Secrets here don't stay secrets for long." Sophia froze, her lips parting. "You know?" Elena's eyes darkened, her gaze flicking toward the staircase where Daniel's shadow lingered briefly before vanishing. "I know enough, and so does he." The words sent a chill down Sophia's spine. Elena retreated into the darkness, leaving only the faint scent of her perfume behind. Sophia clutched the note tighter, her pulse racing. If Daniel truly knew, he wouldn't stop until he had destroyed her. She hurried down the grand staircase, every step echoing like a countdown. The storm outside had broken now, rain lashing the windows as if the night itself was warning her. And somewhere in the shadows of the mansion, unseen eyes followed her every move. The storm had not eased. It roared louder, a wild symphony against the glass walls of the estate. In the grand hall, Edward stood beneath the chandelier, his cane resting firmly on the marble floor. The family had been summoned, his command never refused. Richard and Catherine flanked him in tense silence, while Daniel leaned against the banister above, eyes gleaming with anticipation. Sophia entered last, rain-soaked from her rushed escape outside, clutching the note she had hidden for too long. Edward's gaze pierced her instantly. "Bring it here," he ordered, his voice gravelly but unyielding. Sophia froze, her hand tightening around the folded paper. "No," she whispered. "You don't get to decide who I love." The hall went silent, the weight of her defiance shattering decades of obedience in this family. Daniel let out a dark laugh, slow and mocking. "Finally, she says it. Grandfather, she's been sneaking around with someone beneath us. I warned you she was hiding something." Catherine's lips parted, trembling. "Sophia, tell me this isn't true." But her eyes already knew the answer. Sophia stepped forward, her voice rising with a trembling strength. "It is true. I won't live by a vow made 100 years ago. I won't trade my heart for your empire." Edward's cane struck the floor, the sound cracking through the hall. "Then you are no heir of mine?" The words cut through her like glass, but she stood taller, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. "If being your heir means becoming like you, then I want nothing of it." Richard moved as if to stop her, but Daniel descended the stairs quickly, his eyes flashing with triumph. "There it is, the scandal we needed. With Sophia gone, I'm the only heir. The oath is preserved." Sophia turned to him, her voice breaking with fury. "You used me. You wanted this all along." Daniel smiled cruelly. "I didn't need to. You destroyed yourself." The family erupted in chaos. Catherine sobbing, Richard shouting at Daniel, Edward demanding silence. But Sophia walked past them, her steps echoing like gunshots. At the door, Elena appeared, holding an umbrella. Her eyes met Sophia's, steady and unreadable. "You'll never be safe if you return here," Elena whispered. Sophia nodded faintly, her heart pounding. "I'm not coming back." With that, she stepped out into the storm, the massive doors slamming behind her. Inside, Edward sank heavily into his chair, his hand gripping the cane with shaking fury. Daniel approached him, expecting praise, but Edward's eyes were cold, distant. "You may have won tonight," he murmured, "but when ambition feeds on blood, it always starves in the end." Daniel's smile faltered, just slightly. Catherine collapsed into Richard's arms, her sobs echoing through the hall. The family was broken, the empire still intact, but the cost lingered like a ghost in the storm. And outside, Sophia vanished into the rain-soaked night, clutching her love's note, free from the chains of her bloodline, yet forever marked by the curse of being a Miller. The chandelier above flickered, casting fractured light over the shattered family, as if even the house itself knew the truth. The oath that once bound them now haunted them, leaving behind nothing but betrayal and silence.